Some cases do not arrive looking dangerous. They come wrapped in ordinary municipal paperwork, looking like minor administrative errors. But if you look closely at the fine print, you find a shocking human cost hiding underneath. The morning 14-year-old Emily Turner walked into the courtroom. The room was already filled with a heavy, tense silence. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, shoulders rounded inward, the unmistakable posture of a child who had spent weeks apologizing for a crisis she didn't create. Beside her sat her mother, Sarah Turner, carrying the deep, visible exhaustion of a single parent balancing on the edge of survival. Across the aisle sat Officer Daniel Price, his arms crossed, wearing an expression of pure, dismissive arrogance. To him, this wasn't a family, it was a completed quota. The case on the docket? A parking violation that had quietly escalated into a month-long financial disaster of late penalties, compounding administrative fees, and threats of collections. But as the judge leaned forward and adjusted her reading glasses, she looked at the citation and immediately spotted an absurdity so profound it made her blood run cold. The ticket was written directly to a 14-year-old passenger, a child who was not legally old enough to drive a car, let alone park one. In nearly 4 decades on the bench, she had dealt with every trick in the book, but what this officer was about to defend would push her patience to its absolute limit. Over the next 15 minutes, a simple parking ticket would unravel into a massive exposure of bureaucratic overreach, proving exactly what happens when authority completely detaches itself from common sense. The judge wasted zero time, her eyes locking onto the defense podium like a laser. Officer Price, let's establish the basic facts before we look at a single piece of city code, she said, her voice cutting through the room. Was this child in the driver's seat? No, Your Honor, Officer Price responded, completely unbothered. Was the vehicle running? No, ma'am. Did you see this 14-year-old girl operate this vehicle at any point on the night in question? No, but the vehicle was standing illegally in a restricted curb zone, and the driver was unavailable. The judge slammed her pen on the desk. If the driver is unavailable, you ticket the vehicle, or you wait for the registered owner. You do not hand a binding legal citation to a minor child who cannot lawfully turn a key. What on earth did you expect her to do? Put the car in neutral and push it down the street? Before the officer could hide behind standard bureaucracy, Sarah Turner stepped up to the podium, her voice trembling but steady. She testified that it was a cold, miserable, rainy evening. She had just finished a grueling double shift and needed to quickly grab medicine and milk from the local grocery store. The parking lot was completely packed. She pulled into an edge zone, looked at her exhausted daughter, and told her to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait. 7 minutes. That was exactly how long Sarah was inside the store. But 7 minutes was all it took for an officer looking for an easy target to spring a financial trap. When Sarah returned, her daughter was in tears. The ticket was tucked under the wiper blade, and the officer was already driving away. Emily had rolled down the window just enough to say her mother would be right back, but the officer didn't care. To him, it was a closed case. Vehicle present, restricted zone, citation issued. But to this household, those 7 minutes were about to trigger an inescapable financial avalanche. Sarah Turner tried to handle the situation logically. She called the Parking Enforcement Division the very next morning, assuming a rational human being would look at the file, see that the passenger was a 14-year-old child, and dismiss the error immediately. Instead, she ran face first into a cold, automated wall. The clerk told her the citation was entered into the system, and once a ticket is entered, it cannot be altered without a formal court appearance. But for a single mother working hourly shifts, a formal court appearance means missing work. Missing work means a smaller paycheck. Because Sarah couldn't afford to lose that shift that week, she had to delay. And that's exactly where the municipal machine is designed to crush you. Within 10 days, a statutory late fee was added. 10 days after that, an administrative processing charge hit the account. A double-digit fine quietly ballooned into a triple-digit debt. The judge looked over her glasses at Sarah. "Mrs. Turner, when these fees started compounding, what did that do to your household?" Sarah took a shaky breath, glancing down at her daughter. "It turned our home into a pressure cooker, Your Honor. Every time the mail arrived, Emily would start shaking. She overheard me calculating the overdraft fees at the kitchen table. She stopped sleeping, she stopped drawing her pictures. She honestly believed she had ruined our lives just because she sat in that passenger seat when I told her to." The spectators in the gallery sat completely frozen. This is the hidden reality that comfortable bureaucrats never see. A false citation doesn't enter a struggling home as a simple inconvenience. It enters as weather. It shifts the entire atmosphere, turning ordinary dinner conversations into desperate financial survival equations. Officer Price cleared his throat loudly, stepping forward with his hands on his utility belt. "Your Honor, municipal regulations explicitly state that restrictions in high-yield traffic zones are completely neutral. Signs do not discriminate between adults and minors. The policy exists to maintain clear curbside clearance for public safety. I was simply following protocol." The judge leaned over her desk, her expression shifting from stern to a look of absolute, piercing dominance. "Officer Price, do not stand there and use the word protocol to excuse a total disappearance of common sense," she warned, her voice dropping into a dangerously calm, low register. "We do not deputize automated machines. We deputize human beings, because human beings are expected to possess an operational brain. Protocol is a guideline for performance, not a shield for laziness." She opened the master enforcement file that her research staff had compiled. She didn't just look at Emily's ticket, she looked at the pattern, the metadata behind Officer Price's entire shift profile. And what the data revealed completely flipped the power dynamic in the courtroom. "I'm looking at your citation history for this specific curb zone for the last 90 days, officer," the judge stated, flipping a page with an aggressive snap. "And I'm seeing a highly specific and disturbing trend. 3 weeks ago, you issued a non-standing citation to a delivery driver who was actively collapsing from heat exhaustion on the sidewalk. 2 weeks before that, you ticketed a pregnant woman who had pulled over because she became severely dizzy and was waiting for an emergency vehicle." She leaned forward, pinning the officer with her glare. "Every single one of these citations has the exact same notation. Driver failed to move the vehicle when instructed. You are intentionally targeting distracted, isolated, and vulnerable individuals who are completely incapable of mounting immediate resistance on the street. Why? Because it's fast paperwork. It keeps your volume high, and it ensures nobody argues with you on the asphalt. You targeted a 14-year-old child because she was taught to respect the uniform, and you knew she wouldn't talk back." Officer Price's calm demeanor completely evaporated. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to the flags behind the bench. He opened his mouth to cite the municipal code again, but the judge held a single legendary finger. The entire room held its breath. "Let's look at the actual math of your neutral enforcement, officer," the judge continued, her voice echoing off the high stone walls. "You write a ticket to keep a curb clean. The mother calls 4 times to explain the error, missing hours of work. The system refuses to listen, adding late fees. The child internalizes the guilt, stops sleeping, and requires attention. The family falls behind on utilities because of a single clerical ghost running rampant inside a municipal database." She slammed the file down onto the mahogany bench with a resounding crack. "The city spends thousands of dollars maintaining code enforcement systems to ensure public order. But when an officer uses that system to hunt for easy targets in grocery store parking lots, you aren't protecting public order, you are actively creating public disorder. You are transferring wealth from a household that can barely afford milk into an administrative system that doesn't need it, all to satisfy your own shift metrics. She turned her attention back to the citation file, looking at the technical options available to parking officers under Municipal Chapter 4. According to your own operational handbook, when an officer encounters an unattended minor inside a locked vehicle in a restricted zone, there are at least 4 standard discretionary steps available before a citation is ever drawn. You can perform a basic welfare check, you can issue a temporary warning notation, you can request a supervisor review via dispatch if an obstruction genuinely blocks emergency access. You chose none of them. You chose the single route that punished this family the fastest while requiring you to think the least. The courtroom was completely silent. The delivery driver, sitting in the second row of the gallery, was nodding slowly, his face grim. An elderly woman in the front row whispered softly to herself, "Unbelievable." The arrogance Officer Price had walked into the room with was entirely gone. He looked visibly smaller, exposed by the raw numbers of his own misconduct. The judge turned away from the officer, her expression softening completely as she looked down at the plaintiff's table. 14-year-old Emily was looking up, her eyes wide, tears finally overflowing and tracing down her cheeks. "Emily," the judge said, her voice filled with a steady, commanding warmth, "I want you to hear me clearly, and I want you to remember these words long after you leave this building. You did absolutely nothing wrong, not one single thing. You obeyed your mother, you stayed exactly where you were told to stay, you locked the doors to stay safe, which is exactly what a smart child does. You did not cause this ticket, you did not cause these fees, and you did not cause the stress in your house. Every bit of that belongs to the adults who failed to use their brains around you. Do you understand me?" Emily nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek, a massive, invisible weight visibly lifting from her shoulders. Her mother, Sarah, quietly buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the deep, painful relief that only comes when panic is finally forced out of the room. "Here is my ruling," the judge declared, turning back to her monitor. "This citation is void. Every late fee attached to it is void. Every collection action, administrative charge, and clerical penalty generated by this file is hereby cleared from the record completely. I am directing the clerk to issue a manual clearance receipt in ordinary plain language today, so this mother does not have to carry a dictionary to prove her innocence." She then locked her eyes back onto Officer Price. "Furthermore, I am ordering a full transcript of this hearing along with your 90-day citation metadata to be forwarded directly to Internal Affairs and Departmental Command Review. A badge is an extension of public trust, not a license to target the vulnerable for administrative convenience. This case is dismissed." Justice, in its plain clothes, is rarely about the closing of a file. It is about what happens to the people after they walk through those heavy double doors and return to real life. The review into Officer Price's citation patterns did not simply disappear into a filing cabinet. The department launched an immediate internal investigation, matching the judge's findings with multiple outstanding complaints from local delivery drivers and working parents. Within 6 weeks, the precinct restructured its curbside enforcement guidelines, implementing mandatory discretionary training to ensure that context is never stripped away in the name of volume. But the real triumph of the case didn't happen inside a city building. It happened 3 weeks later, when a small envelope arrived at the judge's chambers. Inside was no ornate thank you letter from Sarah Turner. There were no long legal descriptions. It was a single piece of drawing paper. On it was a vibrant, beautifully colored sketch of a bright summer park, drawn by 14-year-old Emily. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were 4 simple words: "I started drawing again." A child who had briefly stopped being a child because an authority figure made her feel dangerous had finally returned to herself. That is an outcome that no municipal statistic or budget report can ever adequately measure. True accountability isn't about ensuring that every line of a rulebook is blindly executed until there is nothing left of a community. It is about understanding the human truth inside the administrative lie. Sarah and Emily Turner walked into that courtroom expecting to be crushed by the gears of a cold system. Instead, they found a bench that was willing to look past the ink on the paper, protect the vulnerable, and deliver real systemic justice.